Okay, welcome back as we continue our conversation this afternoon. I think this next panel will be is excited and engaged and will give great perspective. So let me just do a brief introduction. Once again, I'll refer you to pages 16 to 19 of your brochure for everyone's bios. But we'll start this afternoon's discussion with Rear Admiral Scott Pappano, who's the Navy Program Executive Officer for Strategic Submarines, and Admiral Pappano will frame the national imperative not only for the Columbia class, but also the need for a strong, stable workforce to build the nation's submarines of all types with that steady demand that runs well through the 2030s. From there, we'll transition to Ms. Adele Ratcliff, who's the director of the DoD Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program, also known as IBAS, where she'll highlight IBAS's not only the program and how it fits within DoD's longstanding efforts to support the development of the workforce and the technology to support our critical programs and workforce. And then we'll move down the table to my colleague Shawn Coyne, who's the Vice President of Human Resources at Electric Boat. And then to his left is Mr. Ray Steen, who is the Vice President of Human Resources at General Dynamics Bath Iron Works. So we're fortunate to have the shipbuilder perspective of the two new construction yards on the East Coast to talk about workforce challenges and opportunities from the industry standpoint. So with that, Admiral Pappano, if you'd like to start us off.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank SENEDIA for putting this together. Obviously, you know, the shipbuilding workforce is very near and dear to my heart. And as Andrew suggested, you know, as the military officer on stage, I think it's my job to establish the pressing need for why it's so important to do this. So thanks again for putting this together, and especially to Molly. I know she's doing, you know, I know it's no easy job herding all the cats on this one, Molly. So thank you. I think, you know, we also had a very good introduction ahead of this panel, you know, from Secretary Rosenblum, you know, kind of putting, you know, about where we are overall, and certainly Senator Reed and Preacher Chris, I guess is what his name was. No, Pastor Chris is what it was, right? And then from Manny and Celeste as well. So I think kind of a big, good general discussion there about, you know, the priorities about what we're looking at here, right? I think this panel can help put a little bit finer point on that, directed directly at shipbuilding right now, which is why I hope we generate some good positive thoughts and questions here. So as the military guy, though, I think as part of setting that pressing need, I'd like to paint a little picture first, you know, about as I look across, you know, the world today. As I watch the news and I see what's going on in the world, it doesn't look a lot different to me than it did in 1938. Right, that's not a great place to be. What's going on in 38, right? So I had, you know, United States was a great power, but I had a great power across the Atlantic, in Europe, right? And about in 1938, that great power was annexing Austria and the Sudetenland under the auspices of, you know, unifying ethnic Germans. Not very different than today. You know, I had a rising power across the Pacific, another great power competitor, right, that was expanding its influence, its economy, its military, on the rise. Not very different from today, right? So that's not a great picture, right? And so I ask myself the question, because it's my job to prepare for war, because that's the only way to ensure that we either deter war, or if it comes, that we win it on our terms, favorably the United States. I ask myself, you ought to ask yourself, right? If I turn the page to 1939, when that great power in Europe invaded a treaty country that we were allied to, not us, but the rest of Europe at the time, and World War II started, well, we turn the page to 1941, and there's an invasion on U.S. sovereign territory, right? It'd be a lot easier in Guam than it would be Hawaii today, but that's not that far-fetched. Right? Are we ready for that? I don't know. It's not my job to answer that one, okay? But I will lean on somebody whose job it is to answer that. If you're paying attention to CNO's remarks at the Heritage Foundation over the last week, He says, hey, we're not where we need to be with the Navy to go fight that war, right? As we look out into the future, we need a 355 ship Navy. We need, at least 12 Columbia-class submarines for strategic nuclear deterrence. We need 66 fast attack submarines. We need to double our destroyer shipbuilding rate from 1.5 a year to 3, right? So that doesn't paint a great picture, right, about what it is. And how are we going to do that, right? It's the people in this room, among many others, that have to go do that for us, right? And I am very much aligned with the Secretary when she talks about what keeps her up at night, right? It's about the workforce, right? Do we have sufficient workforce to go build the ships that the nation needs to maintain our way of life? It's as simple as that, right? So I'll make a couple comebacks to that 1938 thing in a little bit here. But, you've heard a bunch of panelists talk about this, a bunch of speakers talk about it. But the workforce is the rising tide that lifts all boats. Having a robust workforce in the shipbuilding industrial base, and frankly in manufacturing altogether, that's going to get us from where we are to where we need to be. That's the bottom line. And it has to be a collaborative, whole of government, whole of industry effort to go do this. So I am very, happy to see us coming together to have that discussion where we're talking about executive branch, Department of Labor, Department of Defense, and the military services, and education, and transportation, and commerce, right? And all the industry in this room that has to play a part in that as well. Madam Secretary, you're back. Hopefully you heard that I agree with you what keeps you up at night. Okay, good. And my job, our job, frankly, is to develop a bunch of diplomats and disciples in this room that can go forth and conquer, right, and bring about the change that's necessary to build that workforce, right? When Celeste was talking, she mentioned, anything and anything is possible. It's not only possible, it's required at this point, right? We have to go after this, right? We have to do things differently than we've done in the past. We, I think, very much have relied upon a transactional method of doing this. When Electric Boat or Bath went out and said, I need workers. Everybody applied. They took the number that they needed, right? And then, we kept the machine moving, right? It ain't that way anymore, right? As you've heard from other panelists, right? It's different. How we penetrate the workforce, how we get to the opportunity workforces that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, right? Those things are what we have to go do. Think about that differently. Think about it innovatively, and go after this differently than we've done in the past. That's the bottom line there. Because back to that 38 reference, right? It was the soldier, sailors, airmen, and Marines that won the battles of World War II. But they didn't win World War II. The United States industrial base won World War II. The Japanese and the Germans could not keep up with the power of the United States industrial base, right? We don't have the industrial base we had in 1938 or 1941, right? And it's our job, collectively, to rebuild that manufacturing industrial base. That is part of our integrated deterrence. So as we talk across all the levers of power that we can exercise as a nation and deterring war, our industrial base alone is part of that integrated deterrence. And it's an absolute strategic imperative that we rebuild the manufacturing base. Not only do we not have the industrial base that we had in 1939, or 1941, we don't have the industrial base we had in the 1980s. That's the last time we saw the kind of shipbuilding rates that we're looking at as we get into the late 20s and 30s. That, the shipbuilding rate, that would be akin to kind of the naval buildup years of the 80s, right? And we're a third, right? If you look at the industrial base, the number of skilled trades, manufacturing jobs was about 33% of what the nation had, in the national labor market, right? We're down in manufacturing a third of that right now, right? How do we go after that to go rebuild that up? You've heard some thoughts on how we go after that, right? From other panelists, from other speakers, right? But we got to keep thinking about how we go after, right? I really like Manny's discussion of, what are you looking for? I think we know what we're looking for. Have we looked everywhere we need to? I think we're starting to do that, right? The way we think about it, my team and on the shipbuilding side is in kind of a continuum of the work. We have the workforce we have right now, right? And frankly, we've talked about having enough people out there, just finding them. I think it's an and statement, man, to be honest with you. I need to think we need to find those people, right, that we haven't looked at other places, and look for additional people that are not really what we would think in our a typical skill set for us right now. Okay, that continuum, let's talk about that. That talks about moving left, right, where we have talked about getting down into the elementary schools and the middle schools and the high schools and that continuum through the career and technical education, community college opportunities. And how do I enable that to say there's good, high-paying jobs that have a career that supports a mission bigger than yourself, right? You know, the defense of the nation, integrated deterrence, right? How do I get to that? That's one that's moving to the left, to get that workforce, right? We talk about moving right in our lexicon a little bit. What's the other opportunity workforce there that's maybe out there that we're thinking about? Think about, you know, people that already have security clearances, have worked in the industry already, so people getting out of the military and having a direct avenue to them, letting them know there's continued opportunities to serve defense, to serve your nation, where you want to do it in high-paying, high-skilled jobs in the defense industrial base, right? There's even an opportunity workforce, you know, where we talk about all the young men and women that go to recruiters' offices, you know, the military recruiters, and get turned away for whatever reason, because there's only really a small percent of our nation that can actually serve in the military now, meets the requirements. We might have to need to look at that because of our recruiting challenges in the military, right? But if we send all those young women in a way, they've already shown an affinity for leaving home. They've shown an affinity for serving something greater than themselves. How do we get our recruiters to tell them, hey, you can't serve in the Navy because of this, but you know what? You could go build fast attack submarines in New England, right? And here's some opportunities to go do that, right? The details of that I'm going to leave to Adele because she's the expert there, but kind of that concept. And it's more, you know, it's even more than going after that. What are the other opportunity workforces that we can do, you know, that we can utilize that helped build this nation in the past, frankly? And we really started to take a hard look at things like Afghan allies, the 70,000 plus displaced Afghan allies with clearance backgrounds already, you know, in place, right? How do we break them into the labor market? Because that community is very well connected, and as we break that in, they're going to start talking to each other. And the opportunities that Manny talked about and the partnerships that Manny talked about, those become self-fulfilling, right, and help feed that workforce, right? And frankly, they're probably not tied to their homes in Virginia or Texas or California, right? They've been displaced half a world away. You know, how do we bring them to New England, right? How do I get them into this workforce, right? How do I get that opportunity? Same thing with displaced Ukrainian refugees, right? And frankly, you know, any other legal immigrant market that we're looking at, how do we make this across whole of government, drive this to be something where I can have this to be a path to citizenship, right? Where I'm a functioning member of this society. I feel part of America because I'm contributing to it, and it really is, you know, the land of opportunity, right? That exists for us right now, but we got to think about things differently, right? And, you know, as I look across the spectrum, our estimates are something about 100,000 jobs in the submarine industrial base alone over the next 10 years, right? That's a big number. And I think we need to go across that entire spectrum to get what we need. You know, I'm maybe not as optimistic that they all exist right now as Celeste and Manny are, but we need to go after wherever and we can get those folks, to get them in the workforce and make them functioning members of society, being a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And it's not just getting the workforce itself, right? You've heard some other discussions. I think the Secretary commented on this a little bit. It's not only getting the workforce, but getting the workforce to be better, right? And the whole new concept of the Secretary's word, she used the new collar workforce, right? It's how do we get better at what we're doing, right? How do I bring in that, you know, not white collar, not blue collar, but new collar, where I'm doing, you know, automated robotic welding and advanced digital NDT methods and metallic additive manufacturing and whatever other breakthrough technologies I can bring to bear to bring that workforce in, make it more exciting for them while we're making our entire workforce more efficient to meet the shipbuilding needs that we need to protect the nation, right? And so we have some thoughts on that, you know, as we look across, you know, even in this area just up the street at Quonset Point, right? We're about 1,000 workers short right now for what we need to build today. And we're not even at peak shipbuilding, right? We're going to start to get in peak shipbuilding here in FY26 and beyond when I'm building 1 Columbia per year plus 2 Virginias, right? Just between Quonset Point and Electric Boat. And I'm 1,000 short today. How do I get those people there? And so some of the things we bat around is just like Quonset Point, maybe we have an opportunity point, right? Where we bring the power of the collaboration of government and industry together, have something off-site to segregate whatever we have to do as we battle through security clearances, but work with state to get through citizenship, right? And work through, the government about what those folks can have access to while they're working a path to citizenship, and have them start working things that we need done, like sheet metal or anything else that I can just pull out of, the manufacturing line at Quonset Point, right, to have them go drive that work as I bring them up to speed to be more advanced, more skilled workers, right, and get their citizenship and clearances and whatever else we need to get them. Okay, I think that probably said enough there. My folks are looking at me like, okay, it's 15 minutes. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adele because she's really, we've partnered very closely with industrial policy and IBAS, our teams. She's got most of the details. I'd like her to talk through kind of, fill in, put some finer points of what I talked about. So over to you, Adele.
Thanks, sir. It's good to be here with you today. Really hard to follow the lineup today, isn't it? Like consistent themes that we've heard from Ms. Rosenblum on down through the panel. So where to start, right, that doesn't repeat those themes, which could certainly be reinforcing. I like World War II, and so I've used Arthur Herman's book, Freedom's Forge, to kind of shape my thinking on, our approach to what we face on workforce. In fact, it was reading that book and trying to understand what was that framework that we leaned into on the eve, and it certainly feels like it to me as well, that we could use to help provide a pathway for how we need to re-envision our industrial base for tomorrow. To respond to the economic opportunities that sat in front of us as well as national security. One of the things that they had going for them back then was they had strong engineering prowess and manufacturing prowess integrated underneath one roof. Lincoln and Continental Engines didn't just make one thing. They made a lot of different things. They tried a lot of different things, and so they had tried a lot, done a lot underneath that one roof. Manufacturing and engineering coexisted and coincided together. The second thing they had is because of that, their skill set of their workforce matched the technology of the day. It's why we could take people off the bread line and move them into the rivet line. They knew each other, they were connected. They had an existential threat, and they had will. And so for me, that framework tried to, I used that to kind of inform what we did next. In fact, in 2018, we were studying what happened to the U.S. machine tool sector. As Senator Whitehouse said earlier, the investments that we made in World War II, we've lived decades off of that have helped us navigate in the world and advance our democratic principles. But we've eroded those investments over time. And one of those that we were studying in 2018 is what happened to the U.S. machine tool sector, because manufacturing dominance underpins technical dominance. And your manufacturing know-how is embedded in your machine tools. So there's this relationship to having a strong machine tool sector to be able to advance the innovations and technologies that are down in your suites. And so we set out interviewing our global competitors in the U.S. machine tool sector with one simple question. Why can the U.S. not make precision linear guides? Why do I have to wait 18 to 24 months to get precision linear guides out of Asia? And whether it was our Italian machine tool manufacturers, our Japanese, Taiwanese, South Koreans, every one of them said the same thing. It was almost like they had the talking point. They said, your workforce is a job shop. When you move manufacturing offshore and you move from valuing quality manufacturing into cost manufacturing, you became a job shop mentality. And it was in that moment, after walking your shop floors for almost 20 years, that we realized that constantly hearing the impact of workforce, that workforce was undermining entire sectors of foundational capabilities of an industrialized country, ours. And so with that, we set out to really understand the ecosystem of workforce. And as manufacturing, what we learned is as manufacturing moved offshore, the relationship between manufacturing and society, that gap widened. And with that widening gap, we've eroded and corroded our entire educational pipelines and the relationship. And those pipelines, those educational pipelines, that K through 12 and that community college system, which had very deliberate skill development pipelines, also concurrently served as our recruiting pipelines. And so we launched, that slide please. As we studied that ecosystem and listened to our competitors, we launched what we call the National Imperative for Industrial Skills. And I won't forget, when I pushed this forward to my DASD to make sure, this is what we were doing, we were leaning in. At the time, 3 years ago, the comment really was, stay out of it, industry will take care of it. And what we were recognizing is this was a strategic issue that it crossed organizational lines, state lines, boundary lines, sector lines, and it really was beyond the risk of industry now. And so what was the appropriate response? What could we do? And so the NIST model is what we started with, and I was asked, are you sure you want to call this an imperative? And that's how we felt about it, and we were convicted on that based upon the data, and we moved out on that, using some core money that we had in the IBAS program and congressional ad money that we had received on workforce from pushing forward the narrative and the concern about workforce, largely in partnership with the Navy and understanding the implications there. Our community colleges and our universities weren't buying the correct equipment. This is what our competitors told us. You're not buying the right equipment that your industry needs to be able to produce. There's no relationship between that 4-year side and that 2-year side. Your K through 12 system had been eroded, and therefore we were seeing people coming into our community college training programs that can't read a tape measure. Not only are they coming in left, but as we've heard through the comment about the welder, right? More and more is being put upon the manufacturing professional at the shop floor. Yes, we need welders. We need 5-axis machinists, not 3-axis. We need advanced NDTE. But more of the engineering side of the house is being pushed down on that manufacturing professional. And while we had given decades of focus to the engineering front on the need to regrow our engineering side of the house, we had paid little attention to what we needed to produce the weapon systems that we now are a stone's throw from. And these were having real implications to our ability to move forward as a competitive industrialized country. Since that moment, we've, as Ms. Rosenblum said, we've put forward nearly $130 million of targeted investments in our defense communities across a number of efforts related to key skill sets that you need. Precision optics, one of those. We need thousands of those in this country alone. We have one community college in this country that produces those. So we're trying to help grow them and expand them and cascade their capabilities. We've worked with the Navy on their needs, so we're expanding CNC welders, metrologists, additive, NDT, NDE type capabilities along those traditional skill sets. And then we're responding to the new ones. Systems engineering technician programs that you have said that you see this hybrid moment, this manifesting at the shop floor that we have no training pipelines for. So establishing those and then partnering those people across the country that have similar needs and connecting them in those processes. And we've launched, we're pushing forward on piloting new things. How do we reduce the cycle time on training? Because when we started this, we were focused on the most immediate need, right? Those coming out of that community college system that you have immediate employment opportunities for. So we sought to, how do you expand those training pipelines? How do you compress those training pipelines so that we get them faster? Right now, community colleges put out about 10% of your community needs. So one of the things we thought was how could we pilot new efforts like the accelerated training defense program for defense manufacturing down at Danville, Virginia. where we're trying to compress that to about a third of the time of normal training programs. At its peak, we look to push out about 1,000 people per year. But as we're learning, because we prototype and learn and evolve, and as we know better, we do better. One of the glaring things, though, is that we've got to begin to move left into that pipeline, that K through 12 system, and focus there on building those pipelines, because they are the next generation, right? And we've got it, and they serve as our recruitment pipelines. I think for us, as we graduate people out of our efforts, which we're very proud of, and talking, you know, like Darryl said, we're recruiting across a broader landscape of people. We're touching a broader range of women, minorities, underserved, high-risk youth. We've got pilot programs with the National Guard Youth Challenge Program, which exists in 43 states of the 50. Those are funded out of the DoD. These are high-risk youth that have shown a propensity to respond to highly compressed accelerated training programs. We're working to try to figure out how to place the Afghans and others in our ecosystem of both training and then employment. But for all that work, for all the goodness that we've done in the training programs, 50% of our graduates still go without employment in the defense industrial base. I think for us, we have to ask ourselves, is that acceptable? And if not, what causes that? I think the hearts and mind component that we've touched on writ large through a number of panels that we really have to reckon with. We've lost that relationship as in our local communities in manufacturing, which means that we're going to have to take a different approach, a much more thoughtful and deliberate approach in our engagement strategy. It's fierce competition for labor. Yep, we need to go recruit those people that we can and bring them up from one sector into another, especially if it means that they can earn a better paying job and profession. But this really also is about population. The data indicates that many of our heavy sectors sit in states that have declining populations. I was just up in another state a couple of months ago that sits north of here, and they're really concerned. They project that 25% of their population they'll lose in the next 3 years. This area is not unlike that. So we've got to capture everybody. We've got to train them up to the highest level of training that we can. We have to help industry adopt, especially our small and medium manufacturers, adopt Industry 4.0 capability, which points back to a skilled workforce, because they can't do that if they don't have the skilled workforce to help them implement it. And then we got to go deploy ourselves at every level across every community in this country. And then we have to do that together. It's a numbers issue. The largest generation in the history of our country, the baby boomers, are retiring at a pace which they likely held jobs longer than they probably should have, right? Because they wanted it. But now conditions have changed and they retired at the same time that the smallest generation entering the pay pool since the Civil War. And so we have to fiercely compete against other markets and deploy ourselves in unison on the opportunities that they have to contribute to this country in this profession, and do all that we can to recruit them, train them, and retain them in our workforce, which will require, we have to ask ourselves, what cultural shift do we need to have together to win that day? Look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Just waiting for it to load up. All right, there we go. I guess I would say, like everybody else has, thank you to SENEDIA, Molly, everybody here for putting this event together. This is my first time here. This has been a phenomenal event for me as a new participant in this day. I, like the Admiral and the Secretary, without question, the thing that keeps me up all nights is the workforce. You've heard from the Admiral about some of the challenges that we're having at our Quonset Point facility, and we can get into that in a little bit more detail. But first, just a brief introduction to those of you that don't know Electric Boat at all. We've been around since 1899. We started with a facility in Groton, Connecticut. The facility that you've heard about here in Rhode Island was established back in late 73, 74. You can see the numbers of submarines that we've delivered to the U.S. Navy over the years. So this is our line of business right now, nuclear submarines. So you have the Virginia class. You heard the Admiral talk about that, and the Columbia class, which is the ballistic missiles. Maintenance modernization, which is it's a smaller part of our business profile, but it is an essential piece of the business for Electric Boat, because when you look at kind of the flow of work over time, it's not like a flat line. There are peaks and valleys, and it is this work that is so essential to us to maintain the skilled workforce that we need. The Navy has been very willing to give us these jobs availabilities over time. They are very important to us. And then you have the engineering and design workforce for Electric Boat. As far as locations, so the top left is our manufacturing facility in Quonset Point, Rhode Island. As you've heard, it's very close to here. Then we have the shipyard in Groton, Connecticut. That's where Electric Boat has its origins. And then we have an engineering and design facility, which is almost, if you see the picture there of the Groton facility, and you can see the river right there, across the river from that facility is where the engineering and design facility is. You can see our initial staffing numbers. You can see where we are in Connecticut and in Rhode Island with over 5,000 employees right now. So we got almost 19,000 employees. Our facility master plan, there is a lot of work going on. Our corporate parent, General Dynamics, has given us over $1.84 billion to make facility improvements, both in Quonset Point and in Connecticut. So you can see some of the work here, most significantly in the top right. That is the Groton South Yard Assembly Building. That is, yes, that building was built on top of a river, a large part of it. And then the Holland barge on the bottom right, that's going to be carrying a lot of Admiral Pappano's hulls. A decade of significant hiring the last 10 years at Electric Boat, over 20,000, almost 21,000 employees. And so you can see the efforts that we've made. I would completely agree. Admiral Pappano, in his comments, had said that until recently, Electric Boat, both in Connecticut and Rhode Island, could post a job opening in a trade position, an engineering position, or a support position, and we would have more people than we knew what to do with. In 2017, which is when the Columbia program was announced, Electric Boat went off and with one of our partners in Connecticut to evaluate whether or not we thought we had a sufficient labor supply to support the work over the next decade. The answer that we got at that time was yes, we did have a sufficient labor supply. But what they said that we were lacking was training, okay? And so you hear Adele and many people here in this room, Secretary has talked about it today. We really got focused on training. And I think we've done an exceptional job, but I'm not gonna just back it up with words. I will back it up in a second with actual, you can see the numbers. So with the onset of COVID, we had to develop a more robust talent acquisition strategy, and I won't go through all of it with you, but we looked at every part of the hiring process to reduce the amount of time it takes somebody from the very beginning of an applicant to the time that they get onboarded, and did a really great job of compressing that down. Of significance here in Quonset is, as of yesterday, we increased our starting wage for unskilled labor. And so we went up to $20 an hour. And so what happens is, like I said, that's unskilled. Just come in here and we will train you. And how do we train people? Well, it's with a lot of IBAS's help, SENEDIA's help, and we have a representative here from the governor's office in Connecticut, so I would be remiss if I did not also mention in Connecticut there's the EWIB that's out there, and they also work very closely with Electric Boat. Not only is there the change to $20 an hour for unskilled labor, but because of wage compression, we have to make a bunch of other adjustments, and that's going to favorably impact a third of the workforce. So it's around 1,700 employees will be positively impacted by that. Recruiting initiatives. Again, if you go back just a couple years at Electric Boat, we would do 5, 6, 7, 8 recruiting events in a year. Year to date, this year, 2022, we've done 350. Now, a big part of that is getting out there and getting people to apply for our jobs, but maybe almost just as important is for people to know that Electric Boat is out there and we have opportunities. We were in the state of Connecticut has a pro golf tournament a couple months ago, and we were present there. We're present everywhere, and a father of a UConn engineer graduate who was looking for a job came through our booth and said, "I did not realize, all the great opportunities there were at Electric Boat." And so his son got a job, and he also said to us, "Oh, and by the way, my other son is a junior at UConn, and he will be joining us next year." So you see a couple pictures here, and we'll talk about this more in a second here. But the bottom right is the Puerto Rican festival that just took place in Hartford. We were just at the Washington County Fair here in Rhode Island. I believe it was August 20th, I think that's when it was. But literally 2 weekends ago, we had our staff deployed at 5 different events, and then this past weekend we were at another 3 events. So that's just boots on the ground. And then you see here, the bottom right is again, that's in Hartford. That's us at the Hartford has a AA baseball team, and so we have advertising there. We also, just recently hired a new vets coordinator to help out the business. DE&I is an essential, is probably a better term I should have used instead of important part of EB's hiring initiatives. We have ERGs within our organization. The Black Engagement Council there on the bottom right has been a part of Electric Boat since 1991. It's a long time. And these groups, whether it's the Black Engagement Council, the Forward, which is our women's organization, Equal, they are very, in Hispanic, I'd be remiss without mentioning the Hispanic Shipbuilders Association that we have. They are out there and they are supporting us, and I forgot which one of our speakers mentioned this, but they are so important to the business because when they go out to these events, people see folks, they're like, that could be me. And I think it's that, Manny, was it you, Manny? Did you say it? Right? So it's that they can connect with us. And even the young kids, I heard this story about when we were at Latino Fest in Hartford earlier this summer, and we were talking to young kids and talking to them about what shipbuilding is and working in submarines. Those are long-term investments, right, for the business. Here's just, you can see some of our numbers just this year. Let me just kind of get all three of those to come out. The Hispanic population in particular, last year, 19% increase in our Hispanic population, and this year, we're almost up another 10%. Again, Manny, the door, you talk about the doors, and there's always another door. We're always looking for the doors, right? And they're out there. I'm not going to tell you we found them all, but we keep finding them, we keep working them, and these things help us to bring in more and more people all the time. We've used technology a lot to help out our business. Here we go. This is where I wanted to spend some time. So this is, when you talk about money to the pipelines and the significance of the money to the pipelines, here is actual proof of it. In 2021, we had about 1,000 people come through the pipeline programs in Connecticut and Rhode Island. This year, over 1,600 people coming through the pipeline programs. And that's because of money from people like the IBAS, and our states help us out also. We wouldn't be where we are right now without these programs. They started really back up in, 2016, and you can kind of, the early years, I think we were averaging around 400, 500, 600 people through the pipeline. And it's not just the volume. I mean, the volume is significant. The one thing I haven't heard mentioned, and that I think is phenomenal about these pipeline programs in our states, is that they're able to, with very little notice, they can add new programs or add existing additional programs. And we've had some recent evidence of that. And I haven't heard anybody talk about that, but it is unbelievable what they're able to do to support us with very little notice sometimes. And so I want to make sure that that gets called out, because I think that is, I mean, as somebody that is, newer to seeing these things, it amazes me. It really does. So, again, thank you to many of you for that. These are just some recent graduates in the last couple months that have come through one of our Rhode Island programs. Here you can kind of see some of the partnerships. I've obviously been focused on SENEDIA and the EWIB in Connecticut, but the schools are absolutely instrumental in what we do. We've been having conversations with New England Tech, and those people have just been fantastic to work with and talk to us about our needs. This was something I think the secretary had mentioned earlier and was part of the previous discussion, and Adele also had it in her one chart, which is getting to the kids as early as possible, right? That's that's my next slide. This is so we have programs for EB for women, EB for vets, and the Boat for Everyone, which has a heavy has focus on Hispanics. But so this is programs again with IBAS funding that enables us to go out there over multiple weeks and really eliminate some of the, I think, the mental barriers out there that exist, particularly the Boat for Women program, right? Where, I'm a female, can I see myself as a shipbuilder? The answer is yeah. And here it is. And we bring them through the program. Is it 6 weeks, Courtney? Right. And so they're doing some great work there. This is the one I was talking about a second ago. I apologize for jumping ahead. So this is Electric Boat, again, taking this money that is provided to us in getting into the schools and making it possible for kids to see this opportunity to be shipbuilders. So it's something that we're obviously very proud of. You know, we recently had a signing day in Rhode Island and Connecticut, kind of, you know, like how they have events for student athletes, you know, and they hold up their jersey or something like that. So this is, you know, us with high school graduates, supported by both of our delegations here in Rhode Island and in Connecticut. They support it, and we're doing that. And then, you know, I've talked about the investment, obviously, that we've got from our corporate parent. I've talked about a lot of the money in what we're doing it with from the IBAS. In Electric Boat, you know, in the last 5 years has put in over $309 million just into training. You know, we have also have leadership programs. We're piloting a senior leader development program that deals with people that are going to like the director, senior level positions, but we're always evolving, putting new programs into place. You know, attrition, you know, retention is a issue and concern for us. You know, Quonset Point has, especially in 2022, the entire enterprise has spent a significant amount of time and effort to address that, because it's easy to focus on the front end and bringing people into the business, but it's just as important to focus on the back end and what's going on there. And I'm happy to say that at Quonset Point, this year they've made some really significant strides in bringing down those attrition numbers. And so we've done a lot of different things to address attrition. And then this is, I wanted to spend a second on this, which is, and I think these are themes that you're hearing from everybody else that's out there, kind of like what we think are some of the important needs for Electric Boat, but I think they may apply to all shipbuilders, which is this continued investment in these training programs, particularly the pipeline programs. I don't know where we would be without them. In the supply chain, you've heard that earlier, which is, you know, the great thing about that is it's focused on some of the more smaller and medium-sized businesses that are out there. You know, longer-term strategy to facilitate attraction, relocation, and retention. You know, so we've, at Electric Boat, we've spent time trying to pull people in from other parts of the country. I know it's something Bath tried years ago, and we just had a new hire orientation about a month ago. 5 people from Texas. I think we pulled them all from the oil industry. So maybe that makes one of our previous speakers a little happier about that. And another person from Las Vegas. And you know, when we kind of just touched base with them to see how things were going, doing the new hire orientation, all 6 of them said that they were really struggling finding affordable housing. You know, the cost of housing in New England is pretty significant. And so, you know, it's something we're really keeping a close eye on. And Adele, I think this last point, and I swear I didn't look at your comments before, but when you talk about kind of like a collaborative communication strategy, I think we're kind of talking the same language here, which is, you know, shipbuilding, you know, it's a career option for somebody. I mean, we've been around since 1899. I believe Bath's been around longer than us, but I'll let Ray tell you about that. And I think that's something we really got to kind of hone in on. I was at an event down in DC, the Navy League, a couple weeks ago, and one of the people questioned me on, you know, whether it's safe to be in a shipyard or not, and I said absolutely yes, but they were kind of like, well, you're not. What are you doing to better communicate that? And then one other thing that's come up anecdotally a couple times with us is, you know, we have conversations like, hey, are you sending your kids our way for jobs? And they're like, no, we don't support war. Well, I mean, I got more qualified people up here, but I mean, our perspective is that we're keeping the peace, trying to make it safe for everybody. But there's that mentality that's out there. We've had a lot of conversations, you know, collaboration, you said it, Admiral, right? with your team, with us others, with the state and stuff like that. And we just have to keep working to do that. We have to be more innovative. It's something that our company president's been pushing me hard on. And I could probably go on for a long, long time, but I want to make sure Ray has his allotted amount of time also. Thank you.
Thanks, Shawn.
Yep.
So my name's Ray Steen. I've been a shipbuilder for 32 days. I've been with General Dynamics for 16 years. I used to make things that blow up and things that shoot things, and so I came from the ordnance side of the business, based out of Vermont, and I'm just really happy to be part of the Bath team and this culture. In the time I've been at Bath, I've been blown away by the quality of the workforce, the collaboration that we have with our people and our leadership and government agencies and our customer, and that I'm still serving to help our warfighter every day. And it really makes me proud to see those cranes when I drive over the bridge from my Airbnb, because there's no housing in Maine. So housing is absolutely something we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm very happy to be here today with you and to learn about this organization and the collaboration that's possible. Sure.
Oh, here, sorry.
So as I mentioned, I came from the combat systems business. Phoebe Novakovic has led our organization and been a part of this organization for 16 years, and now I'm part of the Marine Systems Group in Bath. We have been around a little bit longer than boats, and now I just realized why I can't say boat in Bath. I have to say ship. So it just kind of came together right here while we were talking, and we've delivered 428 ships in our history. We have over 7,000 shipbuilders in our group. 80% of our workforce is represented by unions. I've never worked in a business in my 30 years that had that kind of representation. We have 1,000 veterans, a very significant veteran workforce. We do have good wages and benefits, and we're really focused on hiring. And really, we've heard retention. When we heard a bunch of the speeches in the morning, it's about how do we get this new workforce, but retention has got to be an element of all the programs that we do to keep people that we do train in the trades, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we have to focus on. But apprenticeship, internal development plans have been an absolutely essential part of how we tried to meet that. We are the largest manufacturer in Maine, third largest to the healthcare system. Our competition for workers is the service industry. How many people have here been to Maine and had a lobster? Okay, so we're competing against the service industry for these jobs, and frankly, there's a perception that service industry jobs can be easier for those new kids coming out of school, and that's the kind of perception we have to battle. And again, we have over 300 Maine suppliers in our state. If you look at the demographics of where we hire people in Maine, where people live, we have people from all over the state. There's people that drive an hour and a half to come work at our shipyard every day. And that's not even the longest commute. This is a loaded number in the left-hand corner because there's another yard that's down there that employs a lot of people. So, but we do employ people from all 16 of our counties. Our main facilities, we have our main yard that's right in Bath, but we also have a bunch of other facilities right in the immediate area. Within 15 minutes, we actually have a new warehouse in the Portland area as well for storage of long-term goods. We're focused now on the DDG programs, the workhorse of our Navy, and we're doing a lot in our manufacturing group to try to figure out how we claw back schedule, how we get our workforce focused on building ships faster and safely with quality on the first time. We still believe we are Bath built, best built, and we have to really encourage our new workforce. And when you see the numbers, that education is really important. Another part of our business, as Shawn mentioned, is really the service business, and that is an essential part of how we keep in tune with what's happening with the Navy and our customer. But these lead yard services and planning our businesses are extremely important for the viability of our business, and we really depend on the continued funding for those programs, and we support those around the globe. When we think about hiring and training, we've invested $60 million since 2018 in training in terms of the facilities, the materials, the partnerships, the time for training. We've hired 4,000 people since 2018. We basically turned this yard over in that period of time due to the amount of retirements that we've had and the hiring that we've had. 2,000 shipbuilders alone were hired in 2021. and 60% of our workforce has less than 5 years of service. That is a huge training gap. The good news is we still have a lot of experienced shipbuilders in the yard, and we found a way to really collaborate with them in creating our training programs. And I want to give you a little peek on kind of what's happening right in the yard, not just because I've only been there 32 days, but it's really good to see the people that are there. So if we could play the video, please.
How do you hire and train 4,000 people to build the world's most sophisticated surface combatants? At General Dynamics Bath Iron Works, we're doing it. Let's show you how. It all starts by attracting good candidates. These are people from within and outside of Maine who are interested in the kind of stability, competitive pay, and benefits that a manufacturing career offers. To find people who want to be a shipbuilder, we undertook an aggressive, grassroots recruitment effort that continues today. Any place in New England people might gather who love our country, that's where you'll find our Bath Iron Works recruiting team. During COVID, we reinvented the hiring process, turning vacant parking lots into drive-through hiring events where we could make on-the-spot job offers to qualified candidates. We also partner with other organizations and initiatives to find the next generation of shipbuilders. That includes SkillBridge and Boots to Roots for veterans transitioning to civilian life, high school career and technical education programs, and jobs for Maine's graduates. We're proud to be part of General Dynamics' paid internship program, which consistently ranks among the nation's top 100 internships. All of these pipelines continue to be great sources of local and national talent. Often, these candidates are people for whom building U.S. Navy ships is a point of pride and patriotism. BIW has benefited tremendously from our partnership with the Maine Community College System. With curriculum and resource support from the shipyard, the state's community colleges have been able to offer several different training courses in manufacturing and marine design. These classes can include a paid stipend to accommodate students who are switching careers or who have childcare responsibilities. Graduates are guaranteed an interview with BIW. Once hired, our new shipbuilders begin a rigorous in-house training program in shipbuilding fundamentals and safe work habits. We've invested more than $60 million in our BIW Training Academy for facilities, new equipment, and the latest training techniques. We've collaborated with our experienced workforce and our unions to maximize the effectiveness of this early training. We worked with our represented employees to expand the new hire probationary period to give people just starting out in the trades the best chance at success. Our trainers are drawn from the ranks of our skilled and represented workforce, and they are among the most talented and the best mentors. The population of new hires is different than it was just 20 years ago, and so our approach to training has adapted. Using micro-learning, our entry-level workforce learns through hands-on tasks that establish muscle memory. We're also incorporating virtual and augmented reality training, so new mechanics have an opportunity to experience the work environment before they're actually immersed in it. This shows great promise for training employees how to identify and minimize job hazards. Graduates of the welding and manufacturing technician training programs become members of Local S6 of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. This group represents about 4,000 of our employees. The IAM also represents Local 7, which includes many employees in technical classifications, such as surveyors, lab technicians, and machine programmers, as well as our administrative support team members. Graduates of the marine design curriculum are hired into our programs for not only new construction, but also maintenance and modernization of destroyers currently in the fleet. Upon hiring, they become members of the Bath Marine Draftsmen's Association, Local 3999, of the United Auto Workers, our second largest union. Our two other unions represent our security guards and firefighters, respectively. Training does not stop with these new employee programs, however. BIW offers an ambitious 2-year apprenticeship program where employees blend work and studies, earning upon graduation an apprenticeship certificate and an associate's degree from Maine Maritime Academy. This program draws applicants from both our represented employees and people from across New England and beyond. BIW often promotes future deck plate leaders from the graduates of our apprenticeship program. We also offer 2 formal professional development programs, one designed for people who want to work in production, and another specifically tailored for engineers. These enrollees, our PDPs, learn about the various parts of the business as well as develop leadership skills. For our current employees, we provide tuition reimbursement for coursework connected to their jobs. BIW recognizes learning is lifelong and new skills are needed in this rapidly changing environment. We have invested in these training programs and in our facilities to meet both our current needs and to build our future workforce. Given the current labor force challenges our region faces, there is every likelihood we will continue to hire aggressively and then train those new shipbuilders for years to come. We are submitting proposals to the U.S. Navy for a 5-year contract to build future DDG-51s, the longest-running Navy shipbuilding program in history. As we do so, it will be with an eye towards ensuring our workforce is proficient and prepared to build the next generation surface combatant, the DDG-X. We are even now scaling up our ability to design that next class of ship, hiring and training engineers and designers, the men and women who will produce the design for the world's most advanced surface combatants. At General Dynamics Bath Iron Works, we know that Bath Built is Best Built doesn't just describe our ships. It also describes our people.
So we do have applications up front, in case anybody's, no, just kidding. So just to wrap up a couple points, we have put a lot of money into the training academy. We're actually expanding it right now. I think the key thing that I'm learning from this conference is how do we connect, what we're doing internally and what we do externally in a really seamless way. Because I think we both have to concentrate on how that connection happens. We have to adapt to different styles of learning and training. Kids today want to learn from their iPad. They don't want to learn from a PowerPoint. I would prefer the iPad as well. We have very complicated old union agreements that we have to turn into modern training documents. And that's a big challenge. And teaching our new folks how to work in that system and work safely in that system is really important. Using these virtual reality tools, and then how do I take the way that we did training in the classroom and then project it right onto the ship so that the mechanic can see that print that he or she saw when she was doing the training right live on the ship in the iPad or on the iPhone. And that's where we have to kind of take our planning systems to as we go forward, linking training with job performance. Retention is a big thing. I do encourage we add the word retention to any time we talk about hiring and training, because retention is a big deal. It's really, really impacting the yard. We've seen the same kind of increase. While we have seen an increase in women in our workforce, like the success we saw at Electric Boat, I do want to say that there are 20,000 Maine high school kids who graduate every year. 60% of them go on to college. Of the 40% that are left, 20% have a drug or substance or criminal background that blocks them. That leaves a very small piece of pie, which happen to be half women. And again, we're still only in the 15% mark. So where to look is a really good question that Mr. Lamari brought up. And we need to really continue to focus that and continue our presence with veterans. They love to come back to the ships they served on. So what's next? We really got to continue to expand into high schools, to keep these courses for students, to get kids excited about shipbuilding and improve our diversity. That's where we're going to capture the hearts and minds of the women that are out there. I did want to make one point on housing as well. I joked about it in the beginning, but the reason we're recruiting our manufacturing people from Maine is while we did have great success in recruiting 1,000 people from outside of Maine, 95% of them left because they couldn't find a place to live. It's a huge number. It's a huge issue in the Northeast. So housing has got to be a big part of the platform, especially when we're partnering with our state and local agencies, as we go forward. And we saw some great success in Maine with a bio company I just saw up in Acadia National Park that actually put in 300 housing units for their workers or something like that. Really, really good best practice. And then continue to collaborate on other things like parking and transportation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to the panel questions. Thanks.
where to begin? Right? You've given a pretty broad look across both government and industry, but why don't we start at the beginning? Admiral Pappano, you talked about, it feels like 1938, and Adele, you referenced an existential threat. And if I relate that to the pandemic as our nearest term existential threat, where, right, as the industrial base, I think we're all proud that we never closed, right? We continued to work, and we saw almost a wartime footing in a lot of cases, right? If you look at Ford making ventilators and masks, and a lot of people don't know this, but BIW made, remember the brain tickler swabs? BIW made wrapping machines, right, that wrapped the swabs for a company that made them in the state of Maine. So everyone adapted, right, under that unity of purpose, right? It's well known within this room, right, and I think even better after today's discussion, but, right, that threat, right, how do we gain awareness to that threat to help further our mission outside, those that are already familiar or part of the industrial base? But just be interested on the panel's perspectives on that as we go out and try to recruit that workforce.
Can we start? Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. So I think, obviously, I talked about, the first step here is admitting that we're alcoholics, but not really alcoholics, but that we have a workforce issue, right? I think what you're seeing is there's a lot of great stuff going on. Good pipelines, good programs, initiatives going on throughout to go do it. And frankly, a recognition that we have a workforce challenge, right? For whatever reasons, okay? There's goodness in that, an understanding that we have a problem. But what I'll tell you is all the good things that we talked about, like I said up front, we still don't have enough workforce right now, despite what we put in, right? So what are the barriers to that, right? So part of what this was, as to build those disciples and diplomats, right? What we hope to get out of this is an understanding that problem exists, right? And then as we move forward and develop the regional training system, methodologies here based on the lessons learned that Adele talked about, to do a couple things, right? To go identify why not. What are the barriers, right? Is it housing? Okay, so why aren't we building affordable housing? What are the barriers to doing that? Is it pay? Is it benefits? Is it fill in the blanks, right? What are the barriers to attracting and retaining the talent that we need right now? And have a collaborative effort across the whole of government, across the whole of industry, in kind of a formal, regional training system that identifies those and attacks those across, and how do we solve those problems? I think that's kind of the summary for me, because, again, there's a lot of great work going on, and it ain't filling our needs right now, right? And that's the bottom line is, so come together as we come with this regional training system methodology and, penetrate the additional demographics that we need to penetrate, figure out what's not keeping people on the job, and I think we clearly hear some housing of that, right? And how do I attract from outside the area and then hold those folks here, right? Because I think there's not enough, frankly, to go fill everything that we need to do in the New England area. That's kind of my thought. If anybody else would expand on it or rebut it.
No, I don't want to rebut it.
Okay.
Yeah, you brought up regionalization. One of the things I didn't talk on is, moving into understanding the entire ecosystem of need in a region and how do you orchestrate that against the supply and demand. But I really think that a lot of this comes down to the individual, right? When we talk about that we're going to have to reach into a broader set of society that is really unfamiliar with who we are. If I think about like products, I came from a farming community, right? Most people don't have a real understanding about how food lands on your table. They don't really understand how that process happens. They have no relationship with it. And it's the same with manufacturing. We've moved it offshore. People don't understand it in their local community. There's no presence there. Now we're rolling in saying, hey, come work for us. There's an opportunity here. That's not how it works. Really, after walking across America, this is really about the threat that we face is not really understanding the audience that we're talking to. We have got to start to put this on terms of the individual. They have to know first we care. It's amazing how little we talk about that. And it is instrumental in terms of our ability to capture their attention and then start to win them into our community. We held a workshop last December at the Defense Manufacturing Conference, and we asked a simple question to our small and medium manufacturers. What can we do to help you that doesn't cost money? Because at the time, I'm not a really big program at the time. And they said, we don't think anybody cares about us. We don't think anybody knows about us. And that's the same thing you hear about people. We've got to go in and let people know that we care about them and start to project our message in terms that relate to their needs. How does it help them as an individual? This is what we're seeing. We're partnering with people. I don't know what it's like to be a young black male from an inner city where people are shooting at each other. I don't know what that's like. I know what it's like to be a gay woman from Mississippi. But there aren't many gay women from Mississippi to recruit into manufacturing. But those that are there, I can relate to them. But we have to go find people that represent the people that we need in our ecosystem and have those communications take hold and take place. I think that is one of the biggest things that we haven't talked about. For all that we've done to recruit people, the bathroom line is still short on the women's side, and we don't have much diversity in the room here today. And we just got to do a better job at that, and I think that starts with really meeting the person where they are and letting them know we care about them as a person first. And then show, once we do that, through all the wraparound support and all the things that we've talked about from our interagency colleagues that they bring to bear, then getting them into the pipeline and then working our tails off to keep them there because we continue to value them as an individual. Never mind then the employment models that we've talked about that we've got to rethink. How do we employ them? Why ask them to move? Oil and gas industry does this all day long. I've asked this for our heavy industry. If you've got to employ 6,000 people and you don't have it in your region, don't ask people to move. Figure out how to employ them so that my nephews are tradespeople, and they live in McComb, Mississippi, a dying town, but they refuse to leave. But they will travel anywhere to work for their company, and they put them on 2-week on, 3-week on shifts and roll them in and out as they need to. And yep, in austere regions like North Dakota, when they went to work there, North Dakota and the oil and gas industry thought it was so important to have people there that they built an entire compound, provided the housing, the food, and everything that they needed to what? Come to work there. Didn't ask them to move, didn't ask them to buy housing, didn't ask them to do anything other than come to work here. I think everything that is out there we have to explore in terms of that question.
I've not always been accused of being an eternal optimist, but I would say that, you know, if you go back to at least the EB story in 2017 when we were told that we really needed to step up the pipeline and education program, and we collaborated with a lot of different people, and we came through that issue, and now I think you're seeing the success of it. So, you know, my optimism comes from that collaboration can happen again with the struggles that we're having from the hiring perspective. You know, and those conversations, don't get me wrong, they're already happening. They're happening during breaks today, right? We had a conversation a few weeks ago with the state of Rhode Island about DCYF kids aging out of the program, and how do we get funding in to educate them about opportunities at Electric Boat, and then, you know, when they're 18, get them into our workforce. So those are early conversations, but that's, you know, a door, right? You know, I'm not sure there's much more that I can add, you know, beyond what's been said here.
No, I think I'd agree with the Admiral's comments. I think that we're 5 years late in at least Bath in creating a lot of the great programs that we have, so we're playing catch up to some degree because of the uncertainty in the yard that we had. I'm not going to link acquisition strategy and talent acquisition together because I'm not educated in that subject enough yet. But certainly in the industries I've followed through my 30 years, the economic realities and ups and downs affect the long-term investments that government and industry put in, and we have to figure out a way to not do that again, is the lesson learned. And that's really important, whether we're funding service contracts or ship strategy. workforce should be part of that equation in some way, in my humble opinion. But I do agree, it's not enough yet, and we have to expand it. And again, thinking about things from housing to substance abuse, I can't tell you how many kids I've had to fire because they have an issue. I saw 73 cannabis signs from Maine to Rhode Island. Not judging. I'm from Vermont, okay? So I'm just saying we have an issue, and it's not being adequately addressed.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I own that, Ray. I mean, it's a little bit easier on the submarine side, but for the companies that we're talking about, that we're building workforce for, that does require, that some predictability, some stability in the workload, right, to make those investments that we're talking about, right? And so the onus is on the government to stabilize those things. Again, I can only speak to the submarine side, so we're very much going after that. There is predictability in the Columbia line, and then, anywhere there's unpredictability in the Virginia line, our goal is to continue going after that, to continue to buy ship sets, long lead material, continue to stabilize the industrial base, but it is a point well taken.
Thank you for that. So, Admiral, I'd like to go back to something you talked about when you started, and I think it taps into what were you looking for and where have you looked relative to, you spoke a little bit about the potential for refugees and a whole of government solution. Could you talk a little bit more about from a speed standpoint, and how do you see that coming together, and are legal resident aliens part of that strategy as well? Because today that is a largely unaddressable pool to, I'd say, a significant portion of this audience. And how can we support you in those efforts?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, obviously, because, I mean, there's, again, as I talk about identifying and breaking down barriers associated with getting that workforce, this is clearly one where we have an opportunity workforce, right, that can supplement what's locally available, right, where I can draw them, those immigrants, refugees, to the area and make them, part of the society here, right? But we struggle with that sometimes of my own accord, right, and how I require, within the government, what they can have access to, what the background checks required are, security clearances. And that's really, again, as we talk about, the interagency, that's something we're working now with. We've had, 5 Afghans graduate our first ATDM class. We have more rolling in to the second pilot right now, and more following on behind that, right? But then we have had some difficulties, right? Say, okay, well, they can't access all this stuff in the nuclear propulsion program. So, and because we don't segregate at the yard, that means we can't bring them on, right? Okay, it's a barrier, right? So how do we deal with that barrier, right? So, okay, path to citizenship. So anything that means no foreign, where I can't show it to a foreign national, goes away once they're U.S. citizens. So how do I speed the process to citizenship, right? How do I incentivize this population to gain citizenship and become a functioning member of the workforce? That's one path, right? And we can work across interagency to do that, and we have started that dialogue right now to go bring that workforce to bear more quickly. But it's not just that, right? There's other opportunities, right? I don't do nuclear propulsion work in all my facilities, right? We talked about Opportunity Point, right, where I could segregate some of the work that is required to get done, or I'm doing pipe or sheet metal or whatever, fill in the blank, something early in manufacturing that's just stuff that feeds something later in the line, right, where I could put that workforce to bear, even not as U.S. citizens perhaps, where I can't get past the no foreign barrier, right, but there is no barrier if it's segregated, and I can deal with that through training, with observation, with, whatever, there's a bunch of things I can put in place to do that. Maybe not perfect for efficiency, right, but if the cost or the benefit is getting additional workforce to do that, maybe it's worth that little bit of additional training or oversight of that workforce to go execute the work that they got to go do. So across those lines is kind of where I look to see where we can bring that workforce to bear fast right now. Does that answer the question, or you look for more there, I think?
You got more? That
I
answers the
probably do,
question.
but no, that sermon's telling me I got no more. Okay, good.
Great, thank you for that perspective. I'd like to open it to the floor and hear not just your questions, but your comments. And I recognize this has been so far largely a shipbuilder-centric type discussion, but I'd like to hear from the rest of the industrial base as well on your challenges and questions and comments. So please.
Hi, Doug Thompson, Granite State Manufacturing, very much in the shipbuilder industrial base. Sorry, I'm not your diversity guy.
Perfect.
But we appreciate the SIB and all the work and things. We're talking about a bunch of different potential programs. But something occurs to me as I'm sitting here listening to you talk. I mean, I've had the opportunity, as most of us have had, to hear Admiral Pappano speak, very strongly about the importance of the work and the inspiration that we take from that. And I've heard Ms. Ratcliff, I've watched her do it with young students in the Philadelphia shipyard at the welding competition there. And we've put together actually a very service to your country sort of recruiting professional video that we're finding good results from. And it just occurs to me, do you have, I don't know if it's video clips or other promotional imagery or things that you can make available to small companies like us that we can couple with that we can say, that we can help reinforce at the trade schools, at the high schools. We all can't be there. You can't be there in person at every one that we need to have. You can't be there in person, but maybe I've missed it, but there's definitely a need for some of what we hear from you folks, because it does have an effect. It reinforces that better than I can do it myself when I hear it from you folks directly. So it's really almost a commentary of if there's something out there or something that could be created that we could go and pluck, this link, that link, and add it to what we're doing. I think it would help.
Go ahead.
So before I turn it back to the panel, I would like to do two things. One, Dan, stand up, please. So this is Dan McFadden. He's the Director of Communications at Electric Boat, and he'd be happy to provide you with imagery and video clips. And Molly, what's the URL for SENEDIA, the We Build Submarines? BuildSubmarines.com. Thank you. And there are resources there through SENEDIA as well. So we absolutely can help. So that starts us off, and now I'll turn it back to the panel to add on.
Well, I would say, as you know, I'm happy to talk to workforces as I go out. If that helps, if I come visit any vendors, I am happy to go reinforce those messages because I'm sure the company, stuff is not the same as my dynamic, charismatic, energetic personality. I think that there's probably some opportunity for us to go look there. So I'll circle back with my team as well, and maybe, from a government, again, the same thing we talked about up here. There is benefit of, the marketing by the companies to go drive that in the shipbuilding in general. But I think there's a separate message there about the importance to the nation, the national defense, that is better coming from a uniform perhaps than the corporations. And we're happy to support that. So I'll work with my team to kind of start, take a lead angle on that. Appreciate that feedback.
Adele?
Yeah, I'll just put a plug in for the competition that you mentioned. Project MFG is a competition that we launched to kind of promote the prestige of manufacturing. At the time, 3 years ago, manufacturing wasn't getting nearly and workforce wasn't getting that attention, but Americans love to compete. We wanted to harness the best trait that we still have, our competitive spirit, right? Project MFG is an interdisciplinary team competition, CNC 5-axis welding, machining, metrology, all underneath compressed timelines, and we do that in local communities. And through now the 3 years that we've been doing that, we've rolled into more than 62 schools have participated across multiple states. We use that to go into communities to help lift you up, right? And to go into different communities, because not all manufacturing communities in the DIB are located near heavy industry, right? So we push into states that aren't necessarily co-located outside the shipyards, as an example, and that has really served well to get our message out about the importance of manufacturing in those communities and help reframe for that local community the narrative that hits on the individual there. Because in the South, there might be one narrative that strikes at the heart of patriotism. In other areas, it might be environmental. But we tailor that message to that community because we need everyone in the manufacturing workforce space. The welding competition that you mentioned, then went on to launch a welding-specific competition, mainly targeted at the ship and subsector, where we go into those communities and host that. And in that case, in Philadelphia, we leaned into the high schools that had career technical education, where we brought their parents along around in a hiring forum where you were represented there, and then put them right in close proximity to that yard, right? So they could see the history of where they could go and create their history, right, in support of this country, and tailored that narrative. But on projectmfg.com, there are individual testimonial videos that are kind of starting to capture, right, the individual that we need, so that everyone can see where they fit in the ecosystem of this space, right? As an individual, you can find yourself in that message. And so you can pull down those videos off of there, right? Yeah. So, but great. But I agree with you. We leaned into asking the national ad campaign, right? We sent them an email saying, hey, we think that manufacturing needs a national ad, right? And zero response, twice on that. But I do think it is worthwhile, and that's one of the things that we've talked about here. We've got to have a national ad campaign that starts to promote the prestige of manufacturing as a sector, and to now ends, you know, that bridges across that narrative for those individuals, and collectively together we need to stand unified in that. And I think that is one thing that is largely missing, right? So, good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea. I think we still hear anecdotally there are pockets of schools out there that are very much steering people down the going to college, right? And that's right for some of us, but for others it's not. And so that, you know, doing something there would be completely supportive of that. To your original, you know, point about the video, you know, as the Admiral knows, his team and Virginia program team are out talking to the electric boat workers all the time, giving them speeches about the importance of what they're doing. It's inspirational to them. It connects them to the product in a bigger mission. It's very important. You know, EB is in the process right now of updating our career website, and one of the things that we are interested in is exactly what you just asked for. So small and medium-sized businesses, yes, but us larger employers are also are very interested in that because I think we can all use that. I think having somebody outside of our organizations speaking to the importance of what our businesses do brings more gravitas to it. You know, I think so. I wholeheartedly agree.
I was just going to do some math. The net present value of an electrician's cash flow doesn't cross the physician until age 58. So if you take the cash that you put into the college, give him a truck, have him start his business, he'll actually make more money as an electrician than a doctor until about age 58 or 59. So that's something I always like to tell my educators, Shawn.
Like that.
Can I do a rollback real quick before we leave that? So it's, you know, we're the Department of Defense, so we're with you, right, a patriotic perspective. But many of the people that we're trying to reach, you know, we're competing against other manufacturers in this country for talent, right? So I think, and then our sector is competing against other adjacent markets. I don't know how many have read the Korn Ferry report that was put out in 2020, but they went and studied the finance sector, the technical sector, medical sector, and manufacturing sector across the globe. And in every one of those sectors in the U.S., we're short on advanced skills. So we're fratriciding ourselves, and we're competing against those much more pervasive, well-known sectors in this country, right? You know, people want to go be a nurse. People want to go into banking and finance. That's Wall Street. And so we're not only fighting for talent, we're fighting against each other, and we're fighting against those. I think the first thing we have to do is begin to rethink, like, how to, again, going back and putting manufacturing on the terms of the individual that we're trying to recruit. One of the things that we've piloted through Project MFG is a middle school focus on called Project Acceleris, where that program is going into middle schools and just helping individuals understand how manufacturing contributes to society along their value system, whether it's environmental change, gun control, national defense. You know, we help them ideate on the things that matter to them most, and then show how manufacturing supports the value proposition of the solution. Because we've got to win them first in the manufacturing, and then we can fight the patriotic perspective next, right? But we've got to get them in here. And so I think that's one thing that we ought to be thinking about is how do we put manufacturing on the terms of the value system of the individual that's coming? So.
Thank you for that. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Candace McDougall. I'm from HII in Newport News, Virginia. So I just have two kind of questions / statements. One being about cannabis and cannabis reform. I know in Virginia, cannabis is now legal on the state level. So a lot of the workforce may not be able to apply to jobs because of their cannabis use, but it is a large amount of people available to be employed because of that. So my question is, what is industry doing to kind of change that model as far as those who may have been had nonviolent cannabis offenses and cannot get jobs within the shipbuilding industry? What are you doing about that? The second question is when it comes to salary and having competitive salary. I have a 21-year-old sister who came to me and told me that she received a full-time job at Wawa for $15 an hour. It's a service-based industry. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then I find out that locally they're hiring for welders at $20 an hour. How do you compete with that service-based industry? So my question is, are salaries being reassessed with inflation and with housing markets? I know in Virginia, I'm not really sure if $15 an hour up here is the same, but I know $15 an hour for a 21-year-old is pretty decent. So I know me, when I looked into employment, I was thinking about how much was I getting paid, right? I started out as a designer, and I looked for, okay, what's the next step, because I need more money. So now I'm going to move into finance, as you say. So how do we make the shipbuilding industry glamorous when it comes to our salaries?
So I'll start with that. So since you asked industry about what they're doing with the cannabis reforms, then I'm going to let industry answer that question for you. So we'll start with that. But, you know, as far as the salaries, right, again, back to the barriers, right? Is that a barrier? And, you know, again, if I look in this region, right, you know, some of the service-based industries are paying 15, 18, 19 bucks an hour for some of that stuff. And you compete with those things, right? And so if that's part of the barriers that we have to come down and have that discussion, I care about the cost of the ships, but they're worth nothing to me if I don't build them, right? And so if we have to talk about what salaries are, then we're going to have that conversation, right? And we're going to, if it's a hard conversation, but that's something we're going to have. Again, collectively, collaboratively, I need to understand what the dynamics are and what we're competing with to go have those discussions, right? But we'll have them, right? That's the bottom line. That I view that like housing, you know, as potentially one of the barriers. Now, there are other ways potentially to offset that we could work across interagency as well, right? Do I give tax benefit to somebody in a manufacturing industry? And so it's equivalent, you know, it's a better benefit. You get the equivalent benefit of it with the tax breaks to incentivize them to move, you know, to work in this sector. There's other ways to go do that make that sometimes harder to communicate, right, than just having what the paycheck says, because some of that comes back to you later if it's tax deferment or anything else. But there's a whole host of things that we can have, and understanding what the art of the possible is there, and what's understanding, as Adele said, you know, what's important to the individual worker, right? Whether, you know, as far as mission and pay and housing and whatever models that we want to impose. I think there's a spectrum of things that we can employ here. Pay is one of them, right? Yeah. But probably not the only one. All right, over to you guys on cannabis. Go ahead, have fun with that.
Well, it's interesting, you know,
Oh, wait,
because, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say before the cannabis comment, if we're waiting for them to come out and Wawa's capturing them, we've waited too long. We have to move left before they ever get to the Wawa moment. Right? We have to go further left into wherever they are before that bang moment to capture them, because Wawas are present, Targets and Chick-fil-A's are everywhere, and we haven't been. And so I'd say that's one of the things, again, to reinforce. We just have to know that we're going to have to do more left of where those decision points come so that we have a good chance of capturing their attention when they get to there.
Before we leave that, if I could, it's I think a great story. We've talked about the Boat for Women program, right? And it'll always leave a lasting impression on me. A young woman, single mother, had I think 2 children. She came to the pipelines, or to the Boat for Women program, from Starbucks, right? And as she tells the story, it was love at first spark, right? She fell in love with welding, right? And she went through the Boat for Women program, then entered the pipeline, right? And within a year was doing our UT welding, right? Highest level welding, had a 0% defect rate, right? And she'd been through that accelerated pipeline program, right? Had the passion, and not only within a year was she at 0%, but was back instructing, right? That's the power of what you just talked about that we see repeated over and over. If we can just get to, make that market penetration and show that visibility of what it can be like, right, in a career that you might not have otherwise seen. I bought you guys some time.
Thank you. There's one other dimension of the Wawa effect, and that's, things like childcare and starting at 7 in the morning. And both employers and providers and local governments need to figure out a way so that, the 9 o'clock Wawa job has much more options for childcare than the 7 o'clock shift start at the yard. So we have to come up with ways to, subsidize things for the early shift, or work with local agencies to change it, or maybe we have to change our shift. I mean that's the kind of radical thinking we have to, I don't know if you know how big of a deal that would be, but it would be it would be a big deal. On that cannabis thing, it's what I was really getting at is that, there are legal things in the United States, right, in different parts of the world. Alcohol, there's just as many people that have an issue with alcohol as they do with cannabis. And from an employer's perspective, we have to absolutely make sure we have an alcohol and drug-free workplace. I'm not going to be welding on a ship 70 feet up with somebody who's stoned or high or drunk. So we need to make sure that we have adequate systems to keep the safety of our workers. But what we have to change, in my opinion, is when we intervene. And instead of waiting till they're terminated, when they get their first written warning, how do I get them in a program? How does the state, deal with the increased access to cannabis? It's going to increase higher drug use. It's a reality. We just have to make sure we're plugging in the resources so that pathway to worse drug use doesn't happen, and that people can there's enough counseling services out there to deal with the substance abuse issues that plague the nation. Yeah, and again, it's always there. It's the hidden secret behind the closet, but we don't do enough on substance abuse and reform. So that's just part of a very complicated web of everything we've been talking about.
All right, so I would echo a lot of what Ray said about cannabis. I would expound on the fact that Connecticut and Rhode Island have pretty significant legal protections around those individuals where you cannot take adverse action against them. There are people that come in the door where we have knowledge, we educate our team on looking for signs of impairment and to make sure that what he just talked about does not happen at all. And if it does happen, there are consequences. The Wawa story, I guess, right, is...
It's a grocery store, right?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't think there's any Wawas up here, but gas station? Okay.
Sheets Plaza.
Yeah. I mean, I could...
Big 7-Eleven.
Yeah, I mean, I could add others to the list. Starbucks is certainly on the list, and they're everywhere. And I would The changes that we've made here in Rhode Island, you know, are in part because we're not just competing against other manufacturers and other shipbuilders for talent. What's unique about what's happened in this this new era after the onset of COVID is that we are competing against these other entities that we never had to compete with before, whether it's your Wawa, the Buc-ee's, Amazon, right? And, you know, so for me, the starting wage at Quonset Point is $20 for unskilled labor, but that's not where that's the beginning. That's not the end. You know, there are so many different paths, whether it's EB or HII, and you know your business better than I, but I strongly suspect that we're no different. There are many progressions. There are different paths that you can take. I don't think you can do that at Wawa. I don't, right? If you want to you know, like you can have you can have horizontal progression within a particular trade. You can have vertical progression where you go to be a planner, or you go into leadership positions, or, you know, wherever. The opportunities in our businesses, right, are significant. And as you move through whatever one of those paths that you take, right, going back to the economics of it, the dollars change, and they change significantly. Not $20 an hour, but maybe 34 or 36 or 40. And if you get shift differential or you're a working leader, there are more dollars that are on top of that, right? And so I think a lot of it is on our businesses to make sure that people don't, you know, there's a lot of those just the $20 things, and that's what people focused on. But our businesses, I think, have very distinct advantages, and our teams just need to clearly communicate that, particularly to that 18 to 34 demographic, which I'm very immensely focused on, right?
Great, thank you. We have a question over here.
Yes, to our HR professionals, Ray and Shawn. Howdy, I'm from Texas, and maybe I'm one of the few from Texas. My question is, as HR professionals, certainly you laid out some amazing work you're doing here in the New England region around bonuses, pipeline, community outreach, but certainly you have suppliers all across the country that you ultimately depend on. And I'm curious what your thoughts are around your responsibility, if any, to support exporting some of your ideas and some of the things that you see working to other areas of the U.S. so that we can also help raise the broader supply network.
I think that's already going on. You know, as some of the folks in this room know, like my HR team and our supply chain team, which have vendors everywhere. You know, I'm not sure about Alaska. I'm not sure. Alaska? Yeah, okay, all right. But they're just about everywhere, and they're certainly in Texas. And there's a lot of sharing that goes on there. So, I mean, that would be my very, you know, we're not so insular that, that we cannot succeed. We, Electric Boat, I'm sure it's the same for Bath Iron Works, we cannot succeed if our supply chain is not robust and healthy. I wish I could tell you the number of parts in like what percentage of a submarine. The Admiral may be able to do it better than I can. It's significant. We cannot hold back talent innovation from those people. We won't succeed.
Thank you.
And another idea too, that I heard it referenced earlier today, is the MEP program. I used to have a plant in Garland in my old life in GD, and it was amazing how quickly the MEP from that area could get to the MEP in Vermont and the MEP in Maine and collaborate on best practices with respect to training and hiring especially. That's a really good, in addition to other GD businesses that are out there that are in the supply chain where we might even be, you might be a supplier for 2 of the divisions. Certainly that sharing is there. But I have found, as I've been around the country, the MEP to be a quick path to make connections across states.
Yeah, that's excellent. I would also perhaps, I think Seth is around here somewhere from OLDCC. I think that DMC program is also another great opportunity in concert with the MEP that we could take advantage Thank you.
And if I could, everyone has thanked Molly, right? Let me channel my inner Molly, right? In that the pipelines, we've talked a lot about the pipelines for electric boat, but the pipelines are for the industrial base, right? Not just electric boats. So all of you have the opportunity to use the existing pipelines to put your folks through them, right? In a lot of cases, that's in much smaller numbers than what they're sized for, right? But you have access to that. And Courtney, would you stand up, please? So this is Courtney Murphy, our Director of Workforce Development, and Courtney and her team have actually taken that model and have started to export it to some of our other business partners. So it was designed to be a model that can be picked up and moved to where the people are. Right, and so right now it's obviously started in Connecticut and Rhode Island, but now it's moving to South Carolina, and we've talked about Pennsylvania. So it's an exportable model, and whether it's Molly and her team or Courtney and her team, be happy to talk more about that, because to your point, right, that the rising tide will lift all boats, and we shouldn't spend time reinventing what is a proven model that thousands of people have been trained through. Great question. Placement rate, it's what, 90, what's that? Over 90% placement rate. And then when you look at retention and long-term retention rates, dramatically higher than what an off-the-street hire that didn't go through the pipelines.
And the retention rate is also obviously much better.
Yeah.
Very,
Hi, I'm Scott Frost, and I'm with the DoD IBAS program and support Adele Ratcliff. And I think before we lose Rob Gorham's question, I'd like to play on that a little bit regarding the Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 part of the supply chain, looking beyond the OEMs and primes. Because just hearing the slash math from you, Admiral Pappano, you think there's roughly, you know, we've talked about electric boats need to hire somewhere between 15 and 20,000 over the next decade, and you were, you know, the slash math says perhaps 100,000 across a larger submarine industrial supply chain. So, coming from the government side here, and this being a partnership, this whole thing is a partnership, trying to figure out how to navigate forward, and we get into responsibilities, you know, who's really responsible when we talk about, say, actively recruiting to get at that 100,000 need. It's a question back perhaps to the primes, to EB, to Bath, and to others. Is there a fundamentally different governmental role when you're talking about the Tier 2, 3, 4 suppliers in solving this problem versus looking at the primes and saying that is your problem, to look deeply within your own supply chain and solve that? Does the government have a different kind of a play for the beyond the OEM level of this problem? It's a roles and responsibilities question.
You want me to answer that? Okay, so I'll answer it. Yes, right. So, again, I'll go back to, you know, kind of my talking points on this, right? I think it's a whole of government, whole of industry approach, right? I think, you know, again, from the government side, I think the primes should be very, very interested in doing this, right? Okay, and I think that they are, right? But the bottom line is, as we talked about, you know, the dynamics have changed from that transactional ability as for, you know, as we've migrated away from manufacturing, as we've you know, to the service-based industry, as we've had COVID and the other challenges of alternate work and those kind of things. I think it's very much incumbent, again, and you see, you know, 2 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting here talking about the, you know, the workforce, right? Because I go, electric boat, go make sure you got it, because if you can't get your vendors to provide you what you need, go figure it out, because then you can't build boats, right? I think there's been a realization, and the fact that you have the panelists that you've seen today, and who's talking on this today, we understand it's a problem that's too big for any one person to solve, in my opinion, right? That's the bottom line, and that's why it's got, and when you have those big problems, right, you know, you have to work these, you know, I don't know all the issues, I don't know all the solutions, and Adele doesn't, and Electric Boat and Bath, they don't know all the solutions, but I guarantee when we bring groups like this together and we drive to these regional training systems that share best in breed of pipelines and best in breed of recruiting and best in breed of retention, right, that we can get better overall as an industrial base. Now, violating a Rickover principle, right, if I can't put my finger in somebody's chest and say, you own it, right, then you could argue that nobody owns it, and there's risk with that, right? But in this case, everybody owns it, right? That's hard from accountability model, right? But I have to go deliver submarines. That's my job for what the nation needs. So I have a vested interest in it, and I am willing to invest in it and to go do it and be involved in that. And I think everybody, you've heard talk, is willing to do that, right? So this is, again, you know, this is, you know, coming together and understanding that we all own this. We all have to go figure out how to go do this collaboratively, because it's too big a problem to solve for any one person, one organization, one department, one whatever. Would you agree with that? She's going to say I own it.
Yeah, you do.
Okay.
No. Sometimes I wonder if Scott's asking a question, an academic question, or is it really a question? Because sometimes we like the intellectual discourse. But I think we answered that, right? I think we just decided collectively that we couldn't wait and we needed to act, that the issue of workforce crossed organizational lines, regional lines, state lines, and policy lines, organizational USG lines. But that problem was so difficult that it really was beyond the risk of industry. It was a market failure in the conditions that led. Now, having said that, we cannot we can't let ourselves off the hook regardless of where we sit in that ecosystem. And I don't think we see enough presence in the problem, really. We just don't. We're out on a lot of communities on your behalf, and we don't see you there. We don't see our small and medium manufacturers. In fact, I think it was in Philadelphia that we had small companies stand up and say, I don't need to be in that problem. I just want them to come find me. Like, that's a lack of understanding the strategic environment that we sit in collectively as in manufacturing. We cannot wait for people to show up at our door. That is too late. When they come out of whatever training pipeline and educational system or retraining opportunity as an adult that they exit out of, and you're waiting for them to find you, they won't. And so I think there's a responsibility on all of us to do better and to engage deeper into our communities where our first line of employment opportunity is and our first educational lines are. I think we just have to do better. When we're out in our communities and we don't see the presence of our own defense industry and defense communities, I think that speaks volumes at every level. And we need to be there together.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Yeah, my name's Dick McNamara, and I've been working in the world of small business innovative research for too long. And the point I'd bring up is not at the individual hire into your companies, but I'm looking at industrial base, supply chain. And one of the things that I see is that Navy's been pretty successful in looking for advertising for projects, and sometimes you get software, sometimes you get hardware, sometimes you get manufacturing topics and companies in. And one of the things that I've found is that a program like SBR is good because you can bring them in, you can test drive them for a little bit, and then see if they pass muster and are going to go on to bigger things. However, one of the things that I also discover is that on average, we'll put a topic out, and it can be a manufacturing topic. We'll get 15 proposals in. Out of that, you only get really typically award 2. And the fear that I see is that how do we just cut loose the other 10? Those 10 companies have registered with SAM, they've registered with the SBIR database, they've written their 10-page proposal, they've demonstrated a commitment that they'll change their accounting system so that they'll do business with the government and become compliant with all the regulations, and yet they just get a letter back that said, thanks for your proposal, we'll see you next time. And, you know, and two companies get to go forward. How can we capture that? And how can we capture those companies that have already demonstrated a desire to work with the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense? How do we not lose them and bring them back in? And that's a challenge that I know because, you know, I'm sure Electric Boat and Bath both go out and compete. You get 5 or 6 proposals, you pick the best. But boy, there's 4 others out there that were competent and capable. What do you do to reach out to them and say, come on back? We need capacity in our supply chain as well as redundancy. I can remember years ago when we were building 3, 4 alternating years, 3 subs, 4 subs, plus the Tridents, that typically we had 3 suppliers for every component that goes on a boat. Now that kind of disappeared when peace broke out during the 90s, but I just look and say, there's an interest of industry to get involved, and I don't know how to get them, and I throw that up to you, is that there's an opportunity there, I think, to get organizations that have demonstrated the interest, want to participate, and we got to figure out how to send them a lifeline to keep them back in the game.
Obviously, a lot to unravel there, but I'll summarize by saying I am more interested in capacity than I am in competition right now. I care a lot about competition, right? But I won't get competition until I generate capacity, okay? And so a lot of what we're doing, right, is on the government side, is trying to drive that expansion of capacity, right? We have a bunch of things that we're looking at to go drive that. And my fundamental principle there is more than enough work to go around, right? I don't have to go do things the way I did in the past. Just like I talked about the transactional nature of hiring, we have seen that the transactional nature of purchasing, if you will, from the primes, right? Or from the government, right? Where it's, okay, I go compete it, I pick the 1 or the 2. And in my position is there's more work there than that, right? I want stability, I want repeatability, right? That is more important to me right now because as I talk about the Columbia program especially, that is a schedule constrained program. I have to deliver that ship heel to toe with Ohio's going offline, and that is the most important thing to me that I have to go after, right? And the way I generate that is by the stability, the predictability, the repeatability, where I have enough work that, hey, Company A, you're doing this thing for the next 15, 20 years. And Company B, you're doing this thing for the next 15, 20 years. And there's some stuff in the middle that I can drive some competition between Company A and B or C or whatever for excess capacity, if you will, right? Where there still can drive some competition, but I want the repeatability, right? So we are going out, I'm very interested things as we drive into the additive manufacturing and metallics field, right? You know, as we develop a center of excellence to go at how do we build the process to qualify additively manufactured parts. My vision of that is that I break down barriers to a lot of the barriers that exist to entry into the defense industrial base, right? Okay, I got it. That's good for all of us, right? Because you will be able to, everybody in this room who already exists in the defense industrial base will be able to take part of that as well, right? But in the end game, if I have the right CNC machine and the right weld wire and the right process that the government has certified through a collaborative effort, right, I can break down barriers to entry because now any mom and pop shop can go make this thing, right? And those kind of things. Like, and frankly, what else can I do differently in ship construction, right? As I go out to the industrial base, we have to transform that as well too. How do I then design for additive manufacturing? How do I go out and say, hey, this is how I currently make a lockout trunk. If I went to industry and said, how would you do this, right? This is what Electric Boat has done for years, right? how would you do it if you had to start from ground zero, right? And we're looking at those opportunities as well, to help not only us, but help Electric Boat as well, right? And go, is there a better way to skin this cat? Sorry for all the cat lovers out there, but is there a better mousetrap we could build, perhaps? Sorry for all you mouse lovers. But anyway, what else can I go do differently, right? How do I transform shipbuilding one component at a time? Just like we're talking about transforming the hiring process one person at a time, or one company at a time, or one region at a time, until we get to the point where we have these rising tides that do lift all boats. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, qualification of new suppliers has always been a challenge for us. That is a huge impediment, whether we're standing up a new domestic source for black powder, and it's in our best interest, still trying to get it qualified and embedded in our systems has always been a challenge, right? And second suppliers and others. I think Admiral Pappano, though, hit on the thread that I was about to bring up, and that is the opportunity for new suppliers to get in the game is on processes and products that we haven't qualified yet. And as our castings and forgings community, we're studying that now as an outflow of that machine tool sector and the health and well-being of that. There will be parts that we don't make large-scale cast and forge parts in this country anymore. We have one U.S. machine tool manufacturer that imports 100 million pounds of cast parts from overseas. So I don't know if we're going to have the investments in those traditional. So the move to how do we use the intersection of additive and machining, which we call preform on additive, on a new hybrid capability and new materials that we do have available to us. These are new capabilities that we own in our industrial capacity now. How do we now re-envision a part for these new manufacturing processes, which then expands that envelope to new suppliers on those parts that we've got to go qualify? I think those are the opportunities as well that you're looking for in the future.
Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for giving us a fantastic overview of the challenges and opportunities that sit in front of us. And we have for each of you SENEDIA Challenge Coin as a token of thanks for participating this afternoon. Admiral?
Oh.
Add to your collection.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So I think you all recognize that this panel stood between you and the reception, which will start at 5 o'clock downstairs in the exhibit area. So thank you. Molly, did you want to say anything?
Just a quick update. The reception is ready now, and Secretary of Navy Del Toro will be arriving around 5 o'clock, and he will be joining us at the cocktail reception tonight. Thank you, everybody. This was really an outstanding, thought-provoking discussion. And I just say we all have a challenge to sort of go forth and come up with ideas and bring them forth and try to do what we can do. Thanks.